Hello Mastermind Gaming community, and in today's video I will be going over the basics of the real-time strategy game Age of Mythology. After visiting some online forums, I saw requests for an introduction style video to Age of Mythology and one that is a little more recent than others. I'm going to do my best to explain the basics and core concepts of Age of Mythology in a way that hopefully will be easy to understand and grasp the aspects of this game. If you have any further questions that aren't covered in this video, feel free to let me know down below and I would be more than happy to help and answer them to the best of my ability. I would like to note that I am not a super competitive player, but just someone who enjoys playing RTS games in a casual sense. So while I won't be the most optimized player, I understand the core concepts enough to hopefully transfer some of that knowledge to you, and without further ado, let's get into part 2. In part 2, we will be going into a little more detail about game mechanics, as well as a good basic strategy, time management, and other key factors to follow in order to get you started with learning how to play the game more effectively. In the first section of this video, we're going to be talking about optimizing your gameplay. So when you start to learn how to play the game more, you will quickly learn that this game is actually quite fast-paced and has a lot going on at any given time. When you start to play more, you will begin to often see players advancing to the classical age at around the 4 to 6 minute mark, so this means you want to begin researching the classical age before the 4-minute mark when possible. You most likely will not be able to do this right away when you first start playing this game. It will take many games, especially if you're new to the genre of RTS games, to reach this stage. And that is completely fine as well. Don't be discouraged by this, but set it as a goal to try to achieve as you improve your game knowledge. You will find that many, including myself, will struggle at times to hit that mark, but this just comes with practice and learning more as you play, as we are all learning every time we play a game of Age of Mythology. Regardless of what culture you play, there are some general rules that you should follow, and most of these apply to many RTS games, not just Age of Mythology. In this section of the guide, we will be discussing what is a strong economy and also more about resource management. Keep your town center working and never let it be idle until you have a strong economy of around 35 to 45 villagers to get an economic footprint to build your base with. You may find you need more as the match progresses, and you can certainly go above this limit to keep gaining resources faster, but do not stop making villagers until you have at least 35 or more. Always keep your resources as low as possible by investing in units, buildings, and upgrades. You should always remember that resources in the bank are resources not being used. Food isn't going to save your civilization from being destroyed, but the troops you can make with that food will. The only time you shouldn't be following this rule is when you are aiming for an expensive upgrade or age advancement, such as building a town center. Even if this is the case, do not let your town center go idle. Balance your resources for the task at hand. If you are going to build archers which cost wood and gold, you do not need as much food. If you find that you have too much of one resource, take villagers away from gathering it and use them to gather other resources you are then running short on. Being able to notice your resources and anticipate what resources you will need will make you a better and more receptive player as you play the game. In the next section, we are going to be talking about scouts, military, and fighting. And in this section of the guide, we will be discussing scouts, who they are, and what they can do to help you. Scouts are a unit that you often start with at the beginning of a match, and varies depending on the civilization and pantheon you decide to worship. However, scouts can also be any type of unit you use to send to an enemy base to get a general idea of what they are doing and building. Scout your enemy to find out what units he is using, find out where his resources are, and the most important thing of all, where his villagers are located. The reason for this is because when you are in the classical and heroic ages, you should avoid fighting enemy soldiers with your own soldiers whenever possible. Instead, what you want to do is what they call raiding in the Age of Mythology. Raiding is when you use a small number of troops, often cavalry, in groups of 3 to 5, and you attack and harass the enemy team's villagers and run away when the enemy gets near you. This keeps them distracted, but most importantly, will disrupt their whole economy by not allowing them to gather resources. Many new players often think they must wait until the Mythic Age and get a massive army to attack, but this is not the case. A group of 5 soldiers in the early game before your enemy can even build units to defend can be far more devastating to their economy than an army of 40 in later ages, because your enemy will also be able to be on the same playing field as you, being able to produce soldiers. If you advance and get an army before they can, attack quickly and decisively to win your match. Meeting your enemy soldiers is inevitable, however. There will come a time when you must use your soldiers to defend your own city or to destroy your enemy's base. The most important thing to remember when you lose a battle is do not simply replace them with the same units that you just lost. Change what units you are building to counter his units. Since you know what units he has now, because he beat you, adapt to meet the task at hand. Again, remember, if you need to know what you can use to counter them with and aren't sure of what unit type they are, you can always left click on an enemy unit while you're fighting them and right click on their portrait to learn more about the enemy you are playing against. Always tend to get more units before you get more upgrades. Always get the line upgrades before armory upgrades. These boost both attack and HP, while the armory upgrades only improve one stat. Even though it's universal, it's not significant enough to justify in most cases when you still have line upgrades to get. All regular unit types specialize against another unit type, as we discussed in part 1, and in turn are weaker against another unit type. Counter units in Age of Mythology actually often get damage boosts for attacking the proper target. For example, a counter cavalry unit might have 10 attack power normally, but when attacking cavalry units gets a 50% boost to its damage, making it significantly stronger than it would normally be against any other type of unit. In order to manage battles effectively, you must learn which units counter what. You will learn this as you just play the game. However, once you get used to a certain civilization, it's recommended that you do switch and keep trying them all out at some point in time. And why is this, you might ask? In a way, it's kind of like scouting out your enemy. This is because to better understand your enemy is to play as them. When you play as all the civilizations, you then learn how all their technologies, how their upgrade paths work, and what units get trained out of what building, and can be done much easier when you play as them to learn their economy and military than just constantly playing against them without knowing that vital information. This way, when you do go back to playing your favorite god and civilization, you can then learn the weak points, the vital buildings for that civilization you are now playing against, and in turn know which ones to target to cripple their economy or their army to give you the advantage in the battle and win. All of this talk about fighting, military, and scouting, but you can't have a strong army without a strong economy. While an army is important to defend your economy from attacks, it's a delicate balance that must be met to figure out a good ratio of economy to military units. And often, the most crucial time for this balancing act is during the classical and heroic ages of a match. You should constantly be building villagers, all the way up to heroic age at least. If you keep your town center busy, you should be at around 30 to 40 villagers by the time you start advancing to the heroic age, which is the target amount you generally want to aim for anyways. When considering which myth units you want when advancing, you will need to make considerations to what god you are and thus how many resources you can afford to spend on getting favor and the resources required to build that unit. Mythological units are powerful, but they are not walking one-man armies. It is best to focus on regular units and ignore favor for the first part of the game, for most playstyles that is. As the game is now, I believe the most good players are not sending villagers to temple or building monuments until well into the classical age unless they attempt some particular strategy reliant on building additional myth units other than the one you get for free from advancing to your next age. Always remember that good economic management is not about who collects the most resources, but who balances and uses his resources in the most efficient way. Trying to keep your resources as close to zero as possible by constantly spending them on units and upgrades and only getting a large amount of resources in your storage for when you are saving for something expensive, it can be scary at first to do this, and many new players will often hoard resources only to be overrun by a large army before they have time to counter, even though they have the resources to do so. They just haven't built a large enough force to hold back the attacking force. When managing your economy, for example, if you are focusing your army on cavalry, you won't need so many villagers gathering wood, but when your opponent starts to mass spearmen to counter your cavalry, you will need to counter them by getting archers or throwing axemen, which require wood, so then you would need to move villagers back to wood, but you wouldn't need as much food at this point. It's a delicate balance of moving your villagers around to what is needed. That is not to say you should take all villagers off any given resource, but whichever resource you need the most should have the majority share of your villagers' attention whenever possible. In the next section of this video, we are going to be talking about food. Food is the one resource in this game that has the largest variety of ways to attain it. From fishing, farming, hunting, herding, and picking berry bushes, there are numerous ways to attain food, some of which are infinitely renewable while others are not. So which of all are the best food resources you should use and when? A general rule of thumb is to always hunt first. As a new player, you may want to go for the convenient chickens or berries near your town center, but hunting is the fastest source of food. After hunting, you can then use your chickens herding berries with farming and fishing saved for later. Try to save your cows and goats for as long as possible or until they reach max food, because the longer they remain in your control, they will slowly get fatter as time goes on until they reach a max food level. Farms are the least efficient source of food and require lots of wood or gold to set up, so try not to rely on farming for as long as possible. Farms do become quite efficient in later ages, but not until you can research all necessary technologies for them to be faster. And another good rule of thumb to remember is to try not to use the gold mine, try to avoid using forests, as well as those chickens, near your town center at the start of a match, because if you do happen to get pushed back to your base, you do not want to be starved of all your resources, and by leaving those key resources near your base, if you do happen to get pushed back all the way to your town center, your villagers can still continue to work near the town center, and they won't have to just sit and be idle not doing anything. Learning about wood. Wood is a very generic resource in this game. Unless you are the Chinese or the Greeks with the plenty god power, the only way you're going to be able to get wood in this game is by chopping down trees. The more villagers you have working on this, the faster you will gain wood. Most maps will have clusters of trees all around the map, allowing you to move around and collect plenty of wood, and is the hardest resource to keep away from your enemy, because there's often many wood patches across any given map. Learning about gold. Gold is mainly mined from gold mines for a majority of a match. In games that last for a longer period of time, you can build a market, which is an economic building you can build in the heroic age, and you can form caravans to run from your market to your town center. The farther away your market is from the town center, the more gold each caravan will be able to hold, but placing it too far away and you run the risk of your caravan being intercepted by enemy troops and thus cutting off your gold supply entirely if all gold mines on the map have been consumed, which can certainly happen on prolonged matches. This is going to be the end of part 2 of the Age of Mythology Beginner's Guide and what you need to know to help you become a better player and learn the things that you need to improve. In the upcoming next video, we will be taking a quick look into each specific pantheon to learn more about the details of each one and how they play differently. If you guys like this series, have questions, or want to know more about a specific topic in depth, please let me know in the comment section down below and I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss out on any future content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.